Stars and Saltires is brought to you by Jock Tamson's Bairn and the Tivoli Theatre. This November, the story of refugee Walter Kress comes home to Aberdeen. When booking through Aberdeen Performing Arts, use the promotional code STARS to get 15% off tickets to this moving family drama. That's STARS, all caps, for special discounted seats to a piece of history. See you there. Hello, I'm Thomas Bywater, and welcome to Stars and Saltires. In this show, we'll explore stories of first-generation Scots. We'll bring you the experiences of child refugees in their own words, talking to Jewish exiles who fled Nazi-occupied Europe, or those just finding their place now. This programme shows how Scotland has offered opportunities for its new people. It will look at the events which displaced them, and how they shaped both those caught up in them and the country which took them on. Join us on our journey from the Holocaust to the Highlands. Act 1. Showtime. If you're standing on Guild Street in Aberdeen, you'll notice a few things. The moored ferries along the harbour wall, so tall you'd think they were buildings, until they move. The train station, swallowed up by a shopping centre. And across the road, facing these, are the red stone arches of the Tivoli Theatre. A sign above each, reading, Box Office, Stalls, Upper Circle. The Tivoli is the city's oldest standing venue. Built in 1872, it has seen some remarkable things. This space was made for touring variety acts and Victorian audiences. It's seen visits from Stan Laurel, Charlie Chaplin, and a young Harry Houdini, fresh from diving into Aberdeen Harbour, handcuffed and chained. The building embodies theatricality, but by the late 1960s, there was no longer the acts or the audiences to support it. Bigger venues and the big screen of cinema had put an end to its glorious run. So it became a bingo hall. Then, by the end of the 90s, it ceased to be anything at all. The building was mothballed and stood empty for 16 years. Jump forward to the end of those 16 years, and in 2013, I was working in the Tivoli. I was there helping to produce the first play to be on in nearly half a century. The show, Inferno, was billed as a Halloween special. There was certainly a feeling of tapping into some of the spirit of the old building. There was a huge amount of interest from those who knew it in its prime. Letters arrived, in their hundreds, from those who heard it would soon see use again. There were two overriding feelings surrounding the production. One was wanting to pull my hair out, and nothing was quite going to plan. The other was a sense of adding to the building's history. There was a lot to live up to. But I hadn't expected what would happen next. Back in the theatre's heyday, Walter Kress was a regular. He'd save up his spare money to attend the Saturday night specials, as he recalled in an interview I held at his house. He now lives in North London with his second wife Avis.
I think it's been shot over 40 years, wasn't it? Gambling and all that paid to the theatre. But as I said, I used to go up every Saturday unless I was away somewhere. And, that's where I developed love for the theatre. We had some beautiful shows on there. Beautiful.
It's not just the strong recollection of the Tivoli he's clung on to, you'll notice. He's also kept his thick Scots accent. In spite of spending the past 5 decades in a built-up neighbourhood of Palmer's Green, it's a clear signifier. He's saying, I'm not from round here. There's more to me than the first impression. But the thing is, he's not from Scotland either.
When I was in Aberdeen or anywhere like that, I can speak so broad that English people can't understand it. I really get into the border speaking Aberdonian.
Weren't born in Aberdeen?
No, in Vienna, Austria, 1930. Here's another dialect, you see.
Walter was born in 1930 to Jewish parents in the Austrian capital, Vienna. The Kresses weren't a wealthy family, nor were they particularly poor. His father worked in a bakery. His mother looked after him and his sister. His earliest memories are of visits to family in Budapest, state-run holidays to the Austrian mountains. Life was fairly pleasant for Austrians in those days, Jews and non-Jews. But by the age of 8, things had become very different. In March 1938, Austria became part of Germany. Overnight, a wave of change arrived in jackboots, and most Austrians greeted it with open arms. Hitler himself visits the Austrian capital on the 12th of March, and is met as if he's just won the World Cup. The plan for Europe and its Jewish population was as yet unclear, but for the time being, through the eyes of an 8-year-old, it seemed like a party.
The day that Austria became annexed to Germany, there were such fantastic goings-on. And I ventured out in the street to go and get milk, and I think I put half a day before I got back home, because I got involved in the proceedings. If there was any fun being done, and music, and sweets being given away, well, why shouldn't I? Why should I be different?
Street carnivals, parades, soldiers handing out sweets. It was an exciting time to be alive. Yet, the atmosphere soon turned sour. As Jews, the Kresses found themselves marginalised, even if people they knew tried to keep them involved. While they had been a minority in Vienna, the Jews had been pushed to the margins. The new wave of Nazi anti-Semitism, which had been spreading across Europe, had finally arrived, in force. One day, Walter's father, Chaim, was arrested at work, a big city bakery, right in front of his colleagues. He was taken forcibly to Dachau. He was one of the first inmates of the concentration camp. His friends at the bakery were incensed. They lobbied and signed a petition to have Walter's father freed, which he was, a week later, and 3 front teeth lighter. Although the Kresses still had friends in Austria, it was a sign the time had come to leave. Walter would never return to Vienna. Instead, he would come to live in Scotland, and live through a mostly peaceful war, the events of which have been written up in his memoir, From the Holocaust to the Highlands. Leaping forward 60 years, to the Tivoli, a copy of Walter's book landed in my lap. With it came a note from Walter asking, "Is there any way this can be used for a show?" As we prepare to bring Walter's story to the Tivoli, I'd like to go back to his journey, and the journey of others, to see just how a schoolboy from Vienna came to be in the far reaches of Scotland. And not speaking a word of English, he came to identify so strongly with his new country. How his story fits in with the others just arriving in Scotland now. So, just what's it like to be brought to a new country, as a child refugee not speaking the language? Turns out it's more difficult to answer than you'd think. Act 2. Other Voices. Walter and his family's escape is a dramatic story, fleeing from the ghettos of Vienna to a far-flung beach in Scotland. Exotic and unlikely, the odds against it must be huge. However, it was far from unique. Further round the north coast, not far along the Elgin Road in Forres, a young Ebenhard Rosenberg was just finding his place. Or should I call him Ebby?
I mean, by that time my name was Mackenzie, you know, so, all right, in Forres, they knew it. Oh, and the wee Jewish German boy, right? That was, in the town, that was it, you know. And, hello Ebby, that was, nobody could say Eberhard Rosenberg, so it was Ebby, was all I got, you know.
He'd arrived on the Kindertransport as one of 10,000 child refugees, an unprecedented humanitarian gesture and an emergency measure. We'll come back to this in more detail in a later episode. Bob, like Walter, was one of thousands of Jewish refugees who had travelled to the island by rail.
I know we landed at Harwich on the 16th of March 1939 because that is the date stamp on my Kinderausweis, the travel permit used by the Burgomaster of Neukirchen on 13th March 1939. That same permit also described me as Stateless, which means stateless. Germany had got rid of me and didn't want me back.
A stone's throw away in Glasgow, and Sydney's Siegfried Mayer recounts an almost identical story.
When I left Germany, the condition was when I left I became stateless and I became a British resident, not a British subject. And the passport I had was green. It wasn't dark blue the way they should have been. And they called me Jock. And they did not know that I was German, and I didn't let them know that I was German. And, well, I mean, the war started, and Germany was an enemy country, but I was always ashamed of being German at that time. I didn't want people to know. And that's probably one of the reasons why I don't speak with an accent.
Changing their names, hiding their accents, an entire generation of hidden German-speaking Jews who had made Scotland their home. But how do you find them and their stories before they might be lost forever? Gathering the Voices is an organisation set up to preserve the memories of Europe's displaced generation of Jews. Set up by Claire and Howard Singerman, along with the Shapiros and the Ansons, these Glasgow families were drawn together by a shared history of escaping the Holocaust. Susan Singerman, Claire's mother-in-law, was a survivor of Auschwitz. The group set about stitching together these stories of survival for current generations. They have so far collected the testimonies of over 30 individuals who have, through some twist of fate, ended up in Scotland.
Well, the 37 we've got up, we've interviewed now well over 50.
This is Claire speaking now.
Significantly over 50, but we're having to try and find more funding to get the rest of the interviews up. A large number of them came, as you can see, from our personal connections working with the refugees and survivors through AJR. Others, there was a group called SAROC that you may have heard of, and that might be more relevant to you, which is the Scottish Association of Reunion of Kinder, that was set up by Dorit Sim, whose interview is on our website, and lastly by Rosa Saccharin, who's a very good friend of ours.
That's very encouraging that you're still finding them. Do you have a lot of people coming forward, or other people volunteering, family members, for new testimony?
Very surprisingly, very slowly. What we did find out is that people who originally didn't want to speak, there's been a sort of critical mass thing, and some of the ones who weren't really willing to speak at the beginning when we started the project have come forward recently and allowed us to interview them.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's almost part of a bigger movement. There are lots of other organisations who are feeling now's the time to get it all down on tape, while they're still around to tell us. But,
absolutely.
There is a lot of that sort of not going local or going native, but it's sort of almost overcompensating. I think Walter definitely had this. He's very proud of his accent, and in the recordings I sent over, he's saying how it gets thicker when he's speaking to English people.
Yes, well, it's a mixture of reasons, because Sidney Mears was, I thought, very interesting, because he said he came at 13, where normally you do not lose your accent, your foreign accent, but he sounds entirely Glasgow, and he said he hated the Germans so much he was not going to be left with any German accent. That's exactly how he saw it, as another way of fighting back. Whereas some of them who came much younger retained significant foreign accents.
Because you feel that, particularly with him, it's a conscious decision to adopt this identity.
I think so, because he was very. I think later in the interview, I think it probably still says that he was in his, I think it must have been his 80s before Henry Wooga discovered that he was a fellow Kinder transport person. He had no idea. So it wasn't something he boasted about at all.
As we prepare to bring Walter's story to the stage, we'll keep in mind the others running parallel. The Ebby Mackenzies and Siegfried Mayers, who found their place and new identity in Scotland. While there's so much concern about new Scots changing the identity of Scotland, the opposite can also be true. Now's the time to tell their stories, as we see further similarities between their time and our own, and before we lose the chance to hear their testimonies to history. Stars and Saltires was brought to you by Station House Books, as part of Jock Tamson's Bairn in the Tivoli Theatre. We'd also like to thank Claire Singerman of Gathering the Voices for all her help and input, and allowing us to use their archive of testimonies. The full collection can be listened to at www.gatheringthevoices.com/testimonies. Music for this episode was by Free Harmonic Orchestra. We hope you enjoyed this show. If you did, be sure to share, download, listen along on your commute, whatever it is you do with your podcasts. But remember to book your tickets for Jock Tamson's Bairn, through aberdeenperformingarts.com. You can also book tickets by calling 01224 641 122. We hope you have an ear for accents.
Do you ever get these funny phone calls, am I inquiring for Mr. McKinsey? I just reply, I didn't get what you're saying, man. I can't understand you. The forest line go. Phone down.